TDS is one of the things that everyone talks about in shrimp keeping, but are you using it the right way? How do you use it? When do you use it? All those things we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to give you a full laid out, like what is TDS, how to use it, how to implement it on your shrimp tank, and how to use it effectively to make sure you are a successful shrimp keeper. Let's get into the video. What is going on, guys? It's Rob with Aquatics, and today, you guys know it is Shrimp Saturday. That means we are diving into some very specific talks on shrimp keeping, but I did want to point out that we do a little bit more than shrimp. We keep guppies, we keep endlers, we keep all kinds of stuff, but shrimp is the focus. But the reason I want to show you this is we do a lot with water parameters. So we know a lot when it comes to TDS, how to effectively use it to make sure that you're utilizing your time and also utilizing your water parameters to the best of your ability and not making some big mistakes that could cost you a lot of shrimp. So today we're going to dive into it, and I'm super excited to talk about TDS. So the first thing you need to understand is TDS stands for total dissolved solid. So it's going to measure everything that is in your water. So the first thing that you're actually going to need is called a TDS pen. We get these on Amazon. They're called TDS Easy. They're a blue pen. And I believe they're around $20, maybe $25, just depending on when you get it. This is the one that we always use because in our opinion, or at least in my opinion, it is the most effective as far as cost goes and also accurate reading. So I want to give you guys an idea. This is a Neocaridina tank. We have these 275 gallon totes. We keep about 200 gallons of water in here. Measuring this, we have a TDS of 138. Now, if you look up online, people are going to say Neocaridina shrimp need a TDS about 200. So does that mean we're wrong? No, it absolutely does not mean that, because TDS, again, stands for total dissolved solids. And so what's in 140 TDS, you have no idea. Just like you have no idea what's in 200 TDS. So just looking at a TDS and being like, oh my gosh, I have to increase my TDS, that is a very bad way to do it. And that's the wrong approach. So I'm going to walk you through what is the right approach and how you can effectively use this pen to save you a lot of time. So apparently my black eye is very noticeable. I'm just pointed out in this lighting. So I feel like I have to address the elephant in the room. I didn't get in a fight. I didn't hit anything. Literally, I laughed so hard that I gave myself a black eye. I know it's unbelievable, but if you guys want to know more, we actually did a members only video on it. So you could tune in, check that out. It's kind of a funny story. But I did want to point that out so you guys aren't being like, man, Rob got beat up for Shrimp Saturday. So that's the story. So let's start with the basics. Everyone always talks about RO water, distilled water, things like that. I want to show you guys something. So this is our RO water storage. This thing is completely full. And when I take the TDS of this, the TDS is 5. So anything under 10, I consider pure water. Because sometimes, you know, there's a little bit of stuff that seeps in, maybe something dropped into the tank. So like you're always gonna have a little bit of TDS. To get 0 is really, really hard. So RO water, distilled water should always be 10 or less. So this is 5. This is the starting point. Now, if you use this water that has nothing in it, has no dissolved solids, that is really bad for your shrimp. You never wanna do that. And so this is a good starting point. This is a way to like introduce you to what TDS is and how it's useful. This is the first useful thing that you could use it for, is making sure that distilled water, RO water is pure. Now let's move on to remineralizing and basically how TDS comes into play again. So we're at the other side of our RO totes. And now these guys are where we actually pump RO water in and we remineralize them. And so we want to get X amount of GH and X amount of K. So we're using these ones, say this one we're using for Caridina. So we're going to use shrimple GH only, and we want to get a GH of 4 to 8, depending on what we're doing it for. So like for Taiwan bees, we want a GH of 4, but for crystal shrimp, we want a GH of up to 8. And so what we do is we dose this. It's 1 pump per 10 gallons. And so we're going to go ahead and figure that out and figure out how many gallons are in here and then raise the GH to where we need it. And then we can use kind of what we call a cheat. So if I stick this pen down in here, our TDS is at 94. So what that tells me is that with this remineralized properly to the correct GH using our shrimple GH+, we know that 94 TDS is our goal for Taiwan bees. So now we never have to measure the GH again. We can just measure the TDS and ensure that we're at 94 or very close to 94. And then we know that that's going to give us our correct GH reading. So that is a proper way to use it. And then if we move on to this one, where we might remineralize this one for Neocaridina shrimp. So we're going to use the shrimple GH and the shrimple KH. We're going to dose it to get our levels to the right way, which here we'd probably want a GH of 10, a KH of 5. And then when I test this, the TDS might be 250. And if it's 250, now we know a properly remineralized toad is 250 TDS. Now that is a successful way to utilize TDS. And there's other ways to successfully utilize it, but this is the very building blocks of how to remineralize water and how to know that you have water that is pure. So let's move on to actually how you can utilize TDS in a normal everyday setting to know whether you're being successful or not. So right here, we have a crystal red shrimp tank. So if we get down here and we actually look at it, you can see these guys are doing pretty well. They're doing good. I know that our TDS on this tank should be 150. We're not dosing anything in this tank. We're just feeding. And so I can come by this tank knowing that I remineralize the water to 150. And if I take the TDS of this tank and it's like 170, what that tells me is there's 20 parts per million TDS in the water that I didn't put there. That means that evaporation is, coming into play where like there's more water leaving the tank than minerals. And so evaporation can raise that. There could be a spike in NO3s, which is the final process of the nitrifying bacteria or the nitrogen cycle. And so that can tell you, okay, if my TDS is at 170, I might even be overfeeding and it's probably time to do a water change. So that is one effective way to use it. The only thing you need to know is if you are dosing things in this tank, for example, fertilizer, which we'll talk about, it will throw off that reading. And so if you're dosing nothing, it's a very accurate reading to use because then it can tell you when you need to do water changes, or at least give you an idea if something is leaching into the tank that you're not planning on leaching into the tank. So that is a very effective way to utilize TDS if you're not dosing anything into your aquarium. So I mentioned earlier that if you're dosing a fertilizer, for example, this is our Shrimple all-in-one fertilizer. We use it on our plant system to make sure they have the nutrients that they need. I know that our tap water comes in at about 100 to 120. So when we're dosing fertilizer, it's gonna spike the TDS. And I'll actually show you. If you come down here, all these tanks drain into a central filtration system. So it's called a sump. Now, if I come to our sump, I know that our standard TDS is 120 to 150, somewhere in that range. And so right now we're at 238. Now, what that tells me is that there is fertilizer in the water. Now, I know that over time, this TDS will eventually get up to about 300. Now, when we hit 300, that triggers us to do a water change because we know like, okay, the plants aren't consuming enough fertilizer. They need a water change because it's just growing in the water. At 300 for us, we start getting a lot of algae. And so we test this every day. When it reaches that critical point of 300, then it triggers us to do a reset on the system. So we'll run a water change to bring this back down to about 200 or less. And then we'll start fertilizing again, wait a little bit of time. And then when it gets up to 300, we'll do it all over again. So that is our trigger to do water changes. And that is how we utilize TDS for plants and fertilizer. Now here's an area where you can start getting into a tricky thing. So I wanna set you guys up for success as far as like, I told you the ways that you can use it, but there's a couple of X factors that will kind of throw off you being able to use it effectively. One thing is if you look in this tank, there's tannins. Now tannins are organics being released in the water that change the color of it, that there's, microorganisms that grow on the alder cones and enamel leaves, things like that. And so when it's breaking down in the water, it's going to release this tea color, but that's also going to raise your TDS. So if you're using Indian almond leaves, you're using alder cones, any type of botanical, it will increase your TDS. So knowing that means that you can assume that if you're using those things, you will see an increase in TDS. Now, another thing with these is we don't do water changes. We do them once a month on our Neocaridina because there's such a massive water volume. And so I can come here a month later and this TDS can be exactly the same as when I set it up. That doesn't mean that, hey, we're doing a really good job and we don't need to do a water change. What it could mean is that, hey, the shrimp are consuming, things out of the water, like the calcium, the minerals, and then they're pooping, and those NO3s are increasing the TDS, and it's kind of balancing itself out. So like as they're consuming the minerals, they're also getting rid of the waste, and the waste is increasing the TDS. So this TDS might be at 150 if that's where we have it, and a month later it might be at 150 again. But the difference is when we first set it up, it had 150 minerals in it, and now it's got 100 minerals in it and 50 waste. And so that's something that, like, if you're just using that only to determine water changes, you might run into problems if you're also not testing NO3. So there is a balancing act. So just be aware of that. Don't use it as like a foolproof number. Just use it as a guide. TDS is not a standalone parameter unless you're using it for RO water or remineralizing. You always want to double check it and make sure it's good to go. Also, the pH in the water, the temperature of the water could throw off TDS measurements. So you always want to try to measure it at the same time every day, or at least like if you do it every night, or at least once a week at night on a Monday, then you can get pretty consistent measurements. So just being careful not to use it as like the foolproof, this is how I determine how I'm going to do this. You want to go into it with caution and just use it as a guide to lead you in the right direction, not it only be your guiding light. So just be cautious. There are some things that can throw it off, but I do have one more helpful tip that can save you a lot of heartache in the long run if you're using TDS. Well, all roads lead us back to the comfy chair. That's all I'm saying. So my last tip is with this guy. See this? This is what we call a very pretty aquascaping rock for your aquarium. Now, the thing that I always like pointing out to everyone is, what is a rock? It's a mineral. It's something that they pulled out of the ground. That means this thing contains some type of mineral that we have no idea what it is. So it could be completely inert. It could have a lot of calcium, a lot of iron. You really have no idea. So one thing that I love using TDS for is if you take a 5-gallon bucket, put some RO water in there, make sure it's 5 TDS or under 10 or whatever. Even if it's 20, it doesn't matter. You measure that water, see what the TDS is. Put this rock in that bucket, put a lid on the bucket so nothing gets in there, no evaporation can happen, and you let that sit for about a month. Now you come back and you test that TDS, and if it's way higher than it was when you started, then you know this rock's probably not safe to put in your aquarium. So this is the TDS test that I use to save me a ton of headaches in the long run. If I want to put a cool rock in my tank, I'll test it for a month. You could probably do less than that. A month will give you a good result. You'll know for sure whether it's leaching anything or not. And then if it is leaching something, there's ways to seal rock, or you can choose not to use the rock at all. So like Dragonstone, it's what I have in this tank behind us. It's because it's made out of clay. It literally is almost completely inert. And if it does leach in the water, clay's really good for plants, so on and so forth, you're fine. So that is my last little tip for you guys to utilize TDS. So go get yourself a TDS Easy or any other type of TDS pen. Doesn't matter. This is just the one that we use. And hopefully you guys got a lot out of this video. Hopefully it saves you a lot of heartache in the long run. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for tuning in on this Saturday, Shrimp Saturday. You guys make it a great rest of your weekend. As always, God bless, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.